You just spent 3 hours reading a book. 2 weeks later, someone asks you what it was about and you can barely remember the main points. Sound familiar? Richard Feynman could read a physics paper once and recall it perfectly months later. The difference wasn't his memory. It was what he did while reading. If you don't fix how you read, you're essentially wasting your time. Think about it. You're investing hours into reading, but retaining maybe 10% of what you consume. That means 90% of your reading time is producing zero results. Over a year, that's hundreds of hours spent learning things you'll forget. Over a lifetime, that's thousands of hours lost. You could become an expert in 5 different fields with that time. Instead, you're trapped in an endless cycle of reading, forgetting, and rereading the same information over and over. But here's what Feynman figured out. Your brain doesn't store information. It stores connections. When you just read passively, you're not building connections. You're letting words flow through your mind like water through a sieve. Feynman had a completely different approach. He called it active reading, and it transformed how he learned. While his colleagues at Los Alamos would read a research paper 3 or 4 times, Feynman would read it once and understand it better than they did. The secret was simple, but it required effort. Let me break down the Feynman active reading method step by step. Before you read, set your purpose. Most people open a book and start reading on page 1. Feynman never did that. Before reading a single word, he would write down a question. What do I want to learn from this? For example, if he was reading a paper on particle physics, he might write, how do particles exchange energy? Having that question in mind transformed his reading from passive consumption to active hunting. His brain was now looking for specific answers, not just absorbing random information. Try this with your next book. Before opening it, write down 3 questions you want answered. Your brain will automatically filter for information that answers those questions, and you'll remember it because it had a purpose. While reading the margin method, here's where Feynman's approach gets really different. He didn't highlight, he didn't underline. Instead, he wrote in the margins. But not summaries, arguments. When the author made a claim, Feynman would write questions. Why? Is this always true? What if the opposite were true? When the author gave an example, Feynman would create his own example in the margin to test if he understood. This forced active engagement. You can't argue with a book unless you're actually thinking about what it's saying. You can't create examples unless you actually understand the concept. Let me give you a real example. Feynman was reading a biology textbook that said, cells produce energy through mitochondria. In the margin, he wrote, why mitochondria specifically? What would happen if cells didn't have them? How did cells evolve this ability? Those margin notes became his personal dialogue with the material. Later, when he needed to recall the information, he didn't remember the textbook's words. He remembered his own questions and the hunt for answers. That's a much stronger memory anchor. After each section, the 5-minute recall test. This is the most powerful technique, and almost nobody does it. After finishing a section or chapter, Feynman would close the book and spend 5 minutes writing everything he could remember about what he just read, without looking back. This is brutal at first. You'll realize how little you actually absorbed. But that struggle is the point. The act of forcing your brain to recall information is what cements it into long-term memory. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that one 5-minute recall session is worth more than 2 hours of rereading. When you force recall, your brain strengthens the neural pathways to that information. When you just reread, your brain says, I recognize this, and does nothing. Here's how to do it. Finish a chapter. Close the book. Open a blank document. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Write down everything you remember. Main concepts. Interesting. Details, examples. Don't worry about getting it perfect. The struggle to remember is what matters. After 5 minutes, open the book again and check what you missed. Those gaps show you what to focus on. The Feynman Review. System. Feynman didn't just read once and forget, but he didn't reread either. Instead, he reviewed using what we now call spaced repetition. Here's his system. After reading, do the 5-minute recall test 1 day later. Try to explain the main concepts out loud. 1 week later, write a 1-page summary from memory 1 month. Later, teach the concept to someone else. Each review session took less than 10 minutes, but it locked the information in permanently. He wasn't wasting time rereading the same pages. He was reinforcing connections that were already built. Creating mental models. The final piece of Feynman's reading method was synthesis. After reading, he would ask, "How does this connect to what I already know?" He'd draw diagrams showing how new concepts related to old ones. He'd look for patterns across different fields. When he learned something in physics, he'd ask, "Does this principle apply to biology, to economics?" This cross-pollination of ideas is what made Feynman a creative genius. He didn't store information in isolated silos. He built an interconnected web of knowledge where everything informed everything else. You can do this too. After finishing a book, spend 10 minutes asking, "What does this remind me of? What other concepts does this connect to? How can I apply this in different areas of my life?" A real-world example: in the 1960s, Feynman decided to learn biology even though he was a physicist. He approached it using his active reading method. While other scientists treated biology and physics as completely separate fields, Feynman found connections. He applied physics principles to biological problems and discovered insights about how molecules behave in living cells. His fresh perspective, built through active reading and connection-making, led to breakthroughs that pure biologists had missed. That's the power of reading actively. It doesn't just help you remember, it helps you create new ideas. Here's the truth that transformed Feynman's life. Reading isn't about how many books you finish. It's about how deeply you engage with ideas. 1 book read actively is worth more than 100 books read passively. When you shift from consuming information to wrestling with it, questioning it, connecting it, and recalling it, you unlock a completely different level of understanding. The same pages that used to slide through your memory now stick permanently. The same hours invested now produce 10 times the return. Starting with your very next book or article, implement 1 technique from this video. Just 1. Set your purpose. Before reading, write in the margins. Do a 5-minute recall test. You'll immediately notice the difference. Write in the comments what you're reading right now and which technique you'll try first. Subscribe for more practical learning strategies. Remember, it's not about reading more. It's about remembering what you read.